I'm Dave Showalter. I'm a conservation photographer from Colorado, and I'm going to talk about a project I've been working on for parts of 7 years. It's called Living River, the Promise of the Mighty Colorado, and I'm grateful to be here. Somebody cut some of the lights, please. Just a little background on me. I did 2 previous multi-year projects for books. The first is called Prairie Thunder, published in 2007 while I was a full-time corporate employee. And then I went straight from that to Sage Spirit, published by Braided River, our current publisher. And that story is built around the life cycles of sage grouse, both greater and Gunnison sage grouse. This is an endangered Gunnison sage grouse in the Gunnison Basin of the Colorado. And also the 350 species in the sage that depend on sagebrush in their life cycles, including us. And this is what it looks like for me a lot of the time in the field, a fancy dirt bag after a cold morning on a sage grouse lek in the Little Snake River Basin of the Colorado. Do a lot of sleeping in my truck. So I'd like for us to just take a step back for a moment from figuring out how we're going to balance the 2 big reservoirs, contemplating what we're going to do with all the uncertainty around climate change and diminishing snowpack, and that climate change is attacking the snowpack in the upper part of the basin, and how we're going to sort out allocations and spread that amongst all 40 million of us. Maybe we can just suspend that kind of stuff for a minute and go to the river. So what I had in mind for today is to take you all on a river journey. And as we look at this image, I show it to say, this is all we have for 40 million of us. This thin line is it. And this thread is what brought us all together here and holds together all 40 million people. And also that this watershed is breathtakingly beautiful from top to bottom, and it's a big part of the reason that a lot of us live in the West. We need to reimagine our relationship to water. We need to think about how we want to talk about water and communicate effectively in a different way than just showing images of a dying river. Maybe we talk differently and say the river is a life force and not a resource. We got to bring 40 million people along, and there's a big gap, I think, between policy and regular folks in terms of understanding this moment. And that's also a big part of the reason I wanted to tell this story. So we need more people to care. Would you like to go to the river? Would you like to go to the headwaters where the swelling river is catching melting snowpack? A storm is clearing on a cool May morning. The atmosphere is clean and clear. Or maybe float the Yampa through Dinosaur and feel compelled to kiss the tiger wall because river lore says you'll have safe passage downstream. And what's it feel like to stand next to the great river, next to Crystal Rapids, deep in the Grand Canyon, take in a third of the world's history, and feel the roar of the river in your chest and the pure intention and purpose of the river to reach the sea as it has for 6 million years, or to float on a river of glass, reflecting the red cliffs above, where the only sound is the peregrines overhead and your paddle dipping the water. And you get to that place where your own heart rate matches the pulse of the river. I was trying to think of the words to say that standing in a river is transcendent, that it changes us. And those of you who know, know. And then I came across this Barry Lopez quote. To put your hands in a river is to feel the cords that bind the earth together. We need better stories. We need better narratives. We need more people to care. My own personal journey began, a little over 7 years ago for this story. So I worked parts of 7 years, but for decades, my wife Marla and I were roaming the high mountains of Colorado in the west and backpacking and going over mountain passes from one watershed to another. And in 2011, we thought we would climb James Peak, 13,286 feet in winter, And we got blown off the mountain a few times, and this is on the Continental Divide between Denver and Winter Park. So we made it on the last attempt, and it was late afternoon on the last day of winter. And as we stood up there, I looked to the north towards Long's Peak and across all of these mountains and ridges that were covered in snow and thought, holy cow, this is all the water we have for the coming year. This is it. Got me thinking in a really powerful way about water in the West. And everything on the right side is going to go east and flow to Denver and our friends in Nebraska. And everything on the left is going to flow west to the Fraser River, first tributary of the Colorado, and on to the Colorado River. It's a wonderful place to explore, to roam the high country on skis and snowshoes, and to go search for white-tailed ptarmigan, an alpine camouflage specialist who spends their whole life cycle above timberline. And they survive winter by eating tiny alpine willow buds and burying themselves in snowpack for insulation. Pika don't hibernate. They gather a larder of hay, of forbs and grasses, a big pile, and they store it in the talus fields of the high mountains, and that gets all covered with snow, and the pika are underneath there eating their hay, and they're protected by the snowpack. In a way of thinking, both the ptarmigan and the pika use snowpack for their survival, and so do we. There's no separation. As we look at this frame, in the lower right-hand corner is the Moffat Tunnel. And every crease in the headwater mountains has a diversion structure on it that sends the water somewhere. A lot of that water goes to the Moffat Tunnel. And then the Moffat Tunnel has a train bore and a water bore, and in the water bore, that water from the Fraser River, 60% of the river flow, is sent through the Rocky Mountains to join South Boulder Creek and power Denver's economies and water our very green grass throughout the Denver metro area. We drew all our maps in this style. We show the upper and lower basin per the compact. We show the river reaching the sea, which I think is important on a base map. Major tributaries, major places that tie into the text, and those trans-mountain and trans-basin diversions to the major metropolitan areas. But this is another way to look at a watershed. So we connect all the high points around the big river, and everything sheds from the mountains down into the big river, to put it simply. So all those creeks and rivers and streams, all that energy and rhythm and pulse is flowing to the big river. We are made of energy and pulse. And when I look at this graphic, I think of it like a human heart or a human nervous system or mycelium crawling across the forest floor with interconnected life force. The river's humble in its beginnings. You can jump across it in its high reaches in Rocky Mountain National Park in the summertime. This is midwinter high in Rocky Mountain. I wanted to tell the story through people who are doing important work. So Kirk Clanky was one of the first people I reached out to. He's president of the Headwaters chapter of Trout Unlimited, engaged in everything you can imagine in the headwaters. And Kirk has a saying that conservation begins with a conversation. And he had a long-running conversation with Denver Water that didn't go anywhere for a long time. It was pretty rough. And then people started to listen to one another. And more recently, a Learning by Doing group was formed. And so it's Trout Unlimited, Denver Water, Colorado Parks and Wildlife, and other entities. And in this part of the Fraser Flats, which was overheating in summer because of the drawdown of the river, there was heavy equipment in the river, and it dredged the channel to make it cooler for trout and established point bars and channel boundaries and restored willow. And I was able to go on a biomass study where we had all these entities in the water and kids and volunteers, and we shocked fish to see what was there, and we took all the data. Here's John Ewert from Colorado Parks and Wildlife with a nice brown trout, and that's all very nice. But the exciting thing from that day was there were fish fry, so fish are reproducing in this restored stretch of the river. And there were sculpin and healthy aquatic insect populations. It brings to mind the idea that all the river needs is a nudge, and she knows exactly what to do. The warblers love it. The songbirds are singing their heads off, protecting nesting territories in spring in that restored willow. And on the Fraser, and if we go upstream into Rocky, there's American dipper, very much a clean water specialist, our only aquatic songbird. They dive for their prey just like trout do. They eat the same things that trout do. They're sort of a trout with feathers. This guy grabbed a gob of aquatic insect larvae off the side of a rock. We worry about fire in the headwaters, and usually that's like that August into September time frame, but in late October 2020, there was a firestorm of the East Troublesome Fire. It was 90 plus degrees and 100 plus mile per hour winds, and it raced through the Never Summer Range and across Rocky Mountain National Park and the Colorado River. And here you see the river snaking out of Rocky, going into Sun Valley Ranch Estates, which were completely leveled by the big fire. And I went back to see life returning, and I've been back a number of times here. Monument Plant is reclaiming the forest floor. The Green River, biggest tributary of the Colorado, starts as a river of ice. 4 major river systems start in the Wind River Range, where rivers are born. And so from Stroud Glacier, the Green River flows through farmland and ranch land, and it hits the first or northernmost tributary, impoundment in the system, which is Fontanelle Dam and Reservoir. And below Fontanelle is Seedskidee National Wildlife Refuge. Tom Kerner is the refuge manager. He's a dear friend, and he uses his camera and a big lens. He carries it everywhere he goes, it seems. And he uses his images to showcase his own refuge. So he's an ambassador for the refuge, and he and his wife, Shelley, live there. And Tom likes to do lots of habitat treatments for the health of the refuge. He talks about ecosystem drivers, those things that really make the ecosystem go for wildlife, like willow and cottonwood, which if you're below a dam, you see the willow and the cottonwood withering because you don't have floods anymore. They don't have their roots or their toes in water. So you have to replace them if you want to have that healthy riparian habitat. And here Russ is trimming a willow to be staked in the shores of the Green River, and the recovery has been spectacular. The name Seedskidee is a Shoshone word, and a Native American word from Siskiyou, which means river of the sage grouse. And so sage hens bring their chicks to the river in the summer to raise them up along the shores of the Green River. They go to the Green River in the day, and then they go back to the sage at night. And it's a stronghold for trumpeter swans. There's 300 plus trumpeter swans at Seedskidee in winter. Right now, trumpeter swans are arriving from as far away as Alaska. A couple of years ago, a few of them were collared, only like 6, I think. And I was lucky, and I made this image, and on the right side is a collared bird. And I asked Tom Kerner about it, and he said, well, I don't know how you got that picture, but I can tell you that a couple of years ago, 2 birds flew from Seedskidee to the Grand Canyon, hung out for a little bit, and came back, and nobody has any idea why. But what they did do is they connected much of the watershed for us in our imaginations. Animals can do that. River otters are another species that needs clean water, and they're doing very well at Seedskidee. This guy's eating a Native American whitefish. They eat a lot of white suckers, and more than anything, lots and lots of crayfish, really magical creatures. Kokanee salmon run upstream from Flaming Gorge. They're not native, but they don't really do any harm. What they do is they spawn and drop their eggs, and then they die, and they feed many creatures and contribute to the biomass in an important way. On one trip to Seedskidee, I arrived, and I met a fisherman who had just come off the river, and he goes, check this out. And he shows me his iPhone, which you get a lot of as a photographer. But it was an amazing picture taken from his boat of a bobcat in a perfectly formed cave with a black background. And I asked him where it was, and it was along this butte somewhere, no way of knowing where. And I thought, I'm going to scrap my plans and go looking for a bobcat. And it was tough to get in there. It was across the river, but I figured it out, made lots of trips up and down that bluff. And while I was searching around, there was screeching overhead, and it was prairie falcons. I quickly realized they were bringing prey items to 4 chicks who were on a scrape over the Green River, and what a wonderful time to witness these guys over a period of a week or so. And the northern harriers and the marsh wrens were circling around in the wetlands, and it was really wonderful. And then on the last night, or next to last night when I was there, I was tucked into a side canyon, camoed up, and she appeared over the ridge and stood there against a sunset backdrop, and it was a really remarkable, memorable, touching, intimate moment. Shortly after that, kittens started marching around the corner and across the ledge over this super steep drop-off. I was kind of holding my breath, but they're cats. They know what they're doing, even at this young age. And then as it was getting dark, I watched one of them nurse on the side of the cliff there. I went to the Utah Denabakea Summer Gathering in 2019, and what I was searching for was a way to tell an important Indigenous story in the scope of this bigger story. And the first night in this teepee, there were elders from the 5-tribe coalition for the protection of Bears Ears: Navajo, Dene, Zuni, Hopi, Ute, and Ute Mountain Ute elders. And there was a slow, steady drum beat and light chanting. And I was mesmerized, and I went to bed late, and it was still going. And I woke up at 4 in the morning, and it was still going. And it was a really, really remarkable moment. And Bears Ears in southeast Utah is where there is the largest archaeological record of the ancestral Puebloan people and wonderful dwellings and artifacts that we leave when we come across them, corn cobs and potsherds and so forth. And it's sacred. It's all sacred to Indigenous folks. You can go out on Muley Point on the edge of Cedar Mesa, and you can survey the San Juan River where it carves the goosenecks in entrenched meanders on its way to meet the Colorado in Lake Powell, with Monument Valley in the background. The 2 sandstone buttes sit atop Cedar Mesa, and you can see them for many miles in a number of directions, and they're spectacular in their own right. But I really think of Bears Ears as the cultural and spiritual center for Native American people with ties to this region. Without, so much considering square lines that we draw on maps, but just think of it as the center of a really important spiritual place. I just saw Cynthia Wilson out in the hall. She was on her way to a Native American women's meeting. It was wonderful to see her. Cynthia Wilson, when I first met her, was the traditional foods coordinator for Utah Denabakea, helping other families grow their traditional foods gardens of corn, beans, and squash, and here the Bears Ears potato. And interestingly, when Bears Ears boundaries were first proposed, they were mapped using the vegetation plots of the ancestors. So there was nothing nilly-willy about any of that, all sacredness. Cynthia's inner hogan, the sacred womb of Mother Earth, lined with stripped juniper from Bears Ears. And it's just been wonderful working with these folks who are now dear friends. Henry Wilson Sr. every single day gets in his 3/4-ton dedicated water truck with a 325-gallon tank and drives to Goulding's in Monument Valley to fill this tank with water for the day. It takes about a half hour with that silly garden hose. You can see how many trucks there are. It was a 2.5-hour wait just to get the water for the day. Ann Castle has said to me a number of times that we promised these folks a livable homeland. We are failing. We need to do better. There's no livable homeland without access to clean water. So the water comes home and gets distributed. The sprinkler system was spreading the water out unevenly, so the people are distributing the water evenly. Eloise, the mom, is in the foreground, Gianna, Brandon, and Cynthia in the background. And then I went back a month later, and everybody was happy. It was a joyful time. The corn was knee-high. The garden was looking really good. And what a wonderful experience. So there's Ann. Hello, Ann. I am grateful to you for your friendship and guidance on this journey. And I think we all owe you a debt of gratitude for joining with your colleague, Bitta Becker, who is Dene, and starting the Universal Rights to Clean Water for Tribal Communities project during the heat of the pandemic, when there was an extreme need for sanitation. When we were being told to wash our hands for 20 seconds, Indigenous people didn't even have water. So I put tribalcleanwater.org up there for you all. If you wish to engage, it's a really, really important project. Gila River, southwest New Mexico, flows from the Mogollon Range under a beautiful cottonwood canopy, where we meet Martha Cooper of TNC, Nature Conservancy, New Mexico, at the river gauge in the Mogollon box in the headwaters, where a dam was proposed and planned decades ago, and the community pushed back. This place is beloved, and it's one of the wildest places in North America, and it's one of, I can only name 2 free-flowing rivers in the desert Southwest. And the Gila is wild and flashy and carves its own channels every year and holds so much wildlife. So Martha lives on the Gila farm in the floodplain of the Gila River headwaters. And on the Gila farm, we see some sandhill cranes. They have an irrigation right, the Nature Conservancy does. So Martha has a seat at the table with the irrigators in the valley. And she goes to all the meetings. And eventually, just like the Kirk Clanky example, folks started to see eye to eye on some stuff. Ultimately, the preferred alternative to the dam was chosen. The dam was stopped and then officially stopped by Michelle Lujan, the governor of New Mexico, in 2020. The Gila is wild and free and spectacular.